So for a bunch of personal reasons, which I'm sure we'll talk about another time, I've been looking at the Rolex catalogue of late. Now what I've realised, more so than ever before, is that behind every Rolex model, there's a story, a big tale, and maybe even a tall tale. Over the past few months, more frequently than before, I've been seeing that the Rolex Explorer didn't actually make it up to the top of Everest with Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary, but that it was actually a Smith's watch that summited. And that's got me wondering, do Rolex lie to us? Not just about how their watches are made or how many they make, but about the big stuff, the stories, the legends, the foundation of their greatest hits that give us the emotional connection to the brand, making us buy their watches. So, let's get into it, and make sure that no AD ever gives me an allocation. Welcome to Doug's Watches, the thinking watch channel. Rolex's marketing and countless collectors love to tell you that the Explorer was the watch that conquered Everest. But here's the thing. Yes, Rolex sponsored the expedition. Yes, Hillary wore a Rolex at base camp. But the watch that actually made it to the summit? A Smith's. See, there was a bit of a mix-up. Rolex published an advert saying their watch had summited Everest, but then a subsequent retraction was issued, which reads, "It would appear from Mr. Barrett's letter that Sir Edmund Hillary was in fact only wearing one watch at the summit, and that a Smith's watch. We congratulate Smiths on the fact that their Smith's Deluxe Ordinary Wind wristwatch reached the summit with Sir Edmund Hillary." So how did the Explorer become the Everest watch? Well, Rolex leaned into ambiguity. While I don't have all the marketing materials for the Rolex Explorer heading into the quartz crisis, a lot of the messaging is built around climbing the Matterhorn, skiing, and some geezer called Wally Herberts. But load up the Rolex Explorer website page today, and you're greeted by a picture of the Everest expedition and some clever wording. Taking passion to the summit. It implies the Explorer, or the oyster-style watch that would become the Explorer, went to the summit. Read into the detail and you'll find this statement. 1953. Rolex equipped the British expedition that saw Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay reach the summit of Mount Everest. There isn't a lie on this page, but there's an implication that is facilitated by the common misconception that Rolex got there first. And why can Rolex get away with pivoting their message away from the adverts we looked at before? Well, in 1980, Smiths shut their doors like many watch brands of the period. They do exist again under different ownership, an old name brought back with an Explorer-style watch, but they're not the same company and certainly don't have the legal capability to battle Rolex on this tale that they appear to bend in their modern marketing. And now I'm left asking that if we look at the brand's other watches, do we find the same story? That the stories of this great brand aren't what they seem to be, but instead distorted myths? To understand this, we need to step back and bring in some theory. In 1957, the French philosopher Roland Barthes published a book called Mythologies. It's a collection of essays about how everyday things like soaps, toys, fashion, accessories are transformed into cultural myths. Not myths as in fairy tales, but constructed narratives that tell us what something means in society. He wrote, "Myth is not defined by the object of its message, but by the way in which it utters this message." In other words, it's not about whether the story is true or false, it's about how the story is used. And Rolex, they are masters of myth-making. Their watches have their own narrative that means something else to society. It doesn't matter if it's true or not, just that it's believed, as that's what sells the watch. In buying and wearing a GMT-Master, you're the jet set. Oyster Perpetual, depicting a quiet confidence. A Submariner, you're showing you have an indomitable, go-anywhere spirit. In my eyes, Rolex isn't just a watch company, it's a marketing company with a watchmaking arm. They have perfected how to build the myth of a product. That's been done through their sponsorship of Wimbledon, yachting, golf, mountaineering, deep-sea exploration. They build emotional narratives around models that haven't changed dramatically in decades. As there is no need if the story, the myth, continues to build aspiration for the product. And by having such a broad catalogue from the Cellini in 1908 to the Deep Sea in Daytona, there is a watch with a story to meet your aspirations, no matter who you are. If you're a 45-year-old middle management type, you can get a Steel OP. Billionaire, and it would sir like a meteorite dial white gold GMT-Master. There is an aspirational watch for everyone within their brand. they are a truly universal luxury. This is because of Hans Wilsdorf. There is no shadow of a doubt that while his watches might not have always been the best in their market, they got the branding and marketing and messaging right. Each watch is an achievement, a crown earned, and through multiple generations they have continued to tell their story, building their legacy as an icon. Hans Wilsdorf was a marketing genius. He even understood the importance of building a prospective future buyer base with a lesser, still costly product, Tudor, which began all the way back in 1926, making derivatives of Rolex watches with off-the-shelf movements at a lesser price point, teasing the buyer with the brilliance that they could have one day, almost ensuring the eventual upsell. There's a mystique to the brand as well. Rolex control their public image so tightly that they don't even publish official production numbers, and they rarely, if ever, respond to critique or comment or move with trends. Instead, as we saw with the Land Dweller and the integrated bracelet trend, they joined when they were ready. The world waits for Rolex to have their say. Rolex let the brand mythology do the work, the one potentially built and reinforced by collectors, resellers, ADs, and yes, YouTubers like me. I can't help escaping the idea of post-truth in this, the notion within contemporary politics that there is nothing that is wrong, just alternative facts. This philosophy labours under the same political strategy as one Joseph Goebbels, the spin doctor of the Nazi Party. Repeat the same story enough times, and eventually, while not the truth, the population come to view it as the truth, and surely that's enough. If you're trying to sell a watch as the best, it doesn't matter if it actually is or not, just that the buyer thinks that it is, and Rolex's stories definitely do that. So what are the stories that Rolex tell us could be in doubt then? Well, if you're not so far in the know, and a general observer of watches or luxury, the average man or woman on the street perhaps, through their F1, yachting and tennis presences, one might be inclined to think that Rolex is the pinnacle of wealth and luxury, but as the comment section will tell you, they are not. There are, of course, the Holy Trinity brands, there's independents like Lager and wacky horology companies like Richard Mille and Moser. But what of the stories Rolex actively sells their individual watches on, not their brand? And please, comment section, do go easy on me here. I went down a few internet rabbit holes and it's sort of my moral imperative to relay my findings. So the Oyster case and consequent Oyster lineup. It was famously advertised in the 1920s as the waterproof watch. In 1927, Mercedes Glietz swam the English Channel with one. If you turn to Rolex's history section for this day, you'll find the paragraph. It is one thing to claim a watch is waterproof, it is quite another to prove it. In 1927, a Rolex Oyster crossed the English Channel, worn by a young English swimmer named Mercedes Glietz. The swim lasted over 10 hours, and the watch remained in perfect working order at the end of it. Except she didn't actually complete the swim that day when she wore the watch. She was pulled out part way, having already successfully swam it a couple of weeks prior. But Rolex still ran the ad. The message, the watch survived the swim, which it did. The swimmer not making it, though, was out of their control. Rolex don't admit this failure, even in 2010 running an advert for the Datejust with the words 1927, the swimming of the English Channel, Rolex for life's defining moments. It's not a lie, it's a marketing spin as a way of saying we make a waterproof watch. It's more emotional and thus impactful this way than just saying 100-meter water resistant. But is it honest? I think not. But does that even matter? Then there's the Submariner, which exists in a contested section of history. Rolex claim again on their website page for the Submariner, the Oyster Perpetual Submariner was, at its launch in 1953, the first diver's wristwatch to be waterproof to 100 meters. No matter what evidence or claim you make regarding who was first to the scene, someone in the comment section will say otherwise. But if you dig into the early models, you will find it wasn't alone. Blancpain's 50 Fathoms beat it to market by a year. Zodiac were quite close as well, amongst a few others. The 6204 Submariner, the original piece, while made in 1953, came to the public in 1954 at the Basel Watch Fair. No matter who you favour in this moment, Rolex Submariner is now known as the dive watch that could survive anything. But are these stories the truth? Yes and no. The watch community, I'd say to a large extent, knows these tales are full of marketing spin, perhaps even willfully ignoring any inconsistency. The stories and mystique, after all, add to the fun. However, the general public and average Rolex buyer, I would argue not. But what about the rest of the brand's stories? Is it the case that we've just not poked holes in them yet? And do take what I'm saying here with a pinch of salt. I am, after all, a madman on the internet. But take the GMT-Master, the airline pilot's watch, designed with Pan Am for transatlantic flight crews. It's the perfect origin story, and I don't want to doubt the origin story. Of course, with my Black Bay GMT, a reinterpretation of the original GMT-Master, the 6542, I have bought into this myth. Pan Am were the first customer of the Boeing 707, so would they mark this moment? Possibly. But have you seen the exchange of letters asking Rolex to make a GMT watch for Pan Am pilots? I haven't. Of course, I'm not an expert in procurement, but if I were looking to commission a new GMT watch, I wouldn't approach someone who hadn't yet done it. By 1954, we'd of course had the first Longines dual-time watch, which came in 1925, and the Glycine Airman in 1953. Pan Am went bust in 1991, so would Rolex see commercial consequence now for twisting the story? Likely not. History is of course always decided by the victor, and in the world of watches, Rolex most certainly are the victor. I don't know when this GMT-Master and Pan Am story gained such prominence, but we can see that there were earlier adverts connecting the two brands, with of course Pan Am's first New York to Moscow flight landing in 1968 getting some Rolex advertising material produced from it. But then we have holes elsewhere in this mythology, potentially not as large as the explorer's tale, but maybe they're a red flag to a larger issue. You'll have seen this advert before. If you were flying the Concorde tomorrow, you'd wear a Rolex. That bit of text is fine, but beneath it, one essential piece of equipment in a Pan Am's Concorde weighs nearly a quarter of a pound. But Pan Am never flew the Concorde. They had an order but cancelled them all by early 1973. Concorde was only flown by Air France and British Airways. Even the Concorde pictured is in its prototype livery. This could simply be a sloppy advert, a mistake that got through approval, maybe a relic from when Pan Am had an order for the supersonic jet, or a part of trying to create a wider myth for the watch. But then turn to the copy on the Rolex website for the GMT-Master 2, as we see it today, adopted by the flight crews of Pan American World Airways. We're again greeted by the same nebulousness that we did with the Explorer and its historic claims. This is no longer putting the story that we've been told time and time again so clearly. The Datejust. Rolex loves to mention that Winston Churchill wore one, but he did also wear pocket watches and a gold Lemania chronograph. But seriously, how many of you knew that name before I just said it? I could have said anything, and with a photo you'd have believed me. But that is the watch of Churchill. And while it's true he was gifted a gold Datejust by Rolex in 1947, there's no real evidence that he actually wore it. I spent some time looking at pictures of Churchill after the Second World War, and can I see a gold Rolex sticking out of a cuff? I sure can't. Maybe your mileage will differ though. Rolex just leaned back and let the myth grow, with ads suggesting that the Datejust was the watch of power. Although it must be said, Eisenhower and Martin Luther King Jr., plenty of pictures of them sporting the crown. So do Rolex lie? They bend, they blur, they curate. And these little potential issues could add up to a delusion like the one central to the Rolex Explorer's history. It seems a little tragic because their brand does have a strong history and it does have these great moments in it. However, now, Rolex let the myth, fans and culture do the heavy lifting, while keeping just enough distance to deny full authorship of the tale. Now the best way to think of this is of course the watch nicknames. There's the day-date nicknamed the President because LBJ wore one, positioning it as the watch of the powerful, when in reality that's probably the Patek Philippe Calatrava that is that. But the name stuck. We have the Root Beer, the Zombie, the Paul Newman, Hulk, Starbucks, Batman, Batgirl, John Mayer. All watches that have had nicknames not given by Rolex. Not perpetuated by Rolex, but instead by the fans that are involved in the storytelling of Rolex, acting as the brand's largest ambassador by cultivating these myths. A dog whistle in their marketing, and people know what the brand and each watch means, what it signifies. It's smart on Rolex's part, it's effective, and in some ways it's no different than what brands in fashion, cars and tech do every day. But here's the catch. When the myth becomes the product, it's easy to lose sight of what's real. And maybe that's fine. Maybe that's part of the charm. A Rolex isn't about specs or movement architecture or even case finishing, as great as they are. A Rolex is about the story, even if the story is part fiction. But we should at least know that. When brands mythologize their past, they also try to reshape your future, to steer your desire, your wallet, your sense of identity. And it's a reminder of just how easily it can be done, for example, with history. But with watches, the case is this. If a pilot is buying a GMT-Master 2 now, the question isn't are they buying it because it's the right tool for their job, but because it's what the myth is telling them to buy. So no, I don't think Rolex are lying in the traditional sense, but they are telling stories carefully, selectively, and letting us fill in the blanks through their silence and distance. And we, as collectors, would do well to pay attention to what's real and what's retold. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, do please leave a like and subscribe. It helps me out more than you know. If you want to help me make more of these, do please consider becoming a channel member by hitting join as well. And of course, I will see you next time. Bye bye.